The secret I should have told no one. 5 days after my son's wedding, my new daughter-in-law pulled into my driveway in a black luxury SUV. She wasn't alone. A silver-haired man in a perfectly tailored suit stepped out behind her, carrying a leather briefcase. She smiled. Not the kind of smile that makes you feel welcome. The kind people wear when they've already convinced themselves they've won. Less than a week earlier, she'd become part of my family. Now, she was sitting in my living room, preparing to ask for something my late husband had spent for decades building. In that moment, I realized my husband had been right all along. Some secrets aren't meant to hide money. They're meant to protect the people you love. But before I tell you what happened in my living room that afternoon, you need to understand why. I kept one secret from almost everyone, including my own son. My name is Margaret Collins. I'm 68 years old. And 18 months ago I lost my husband, Daniel, after 43 wonderful years together. His favorite coffee mug is still sitting beside the kitchen sink. Every now and then, I catch myself reaching for it before remembering he's gone. After Daniel died, every decision felt heavier because I no longer had the one person whose judgment I trusted without question. I had no idea those decisions would soon be tested in ways I never imagined. Daniel wasn't born into wealth. He earned everything through patience, long hours, and more sacrifices than anyone ever saw. Together, we bought a struggling neighborhood hardware store that everyone else had given up on. Slowly, that one little store grew into a successful chain, serving communities across several states. But if you had driven past our house, you never would have guessed it. We stayed in the same modest home. We drove practical cars. Daniel refused to let money change who we were. He always told me, the moment money changes the way people look at you, it's already costing too much. I didn't truly understand what he meant until after he was gone. When his estate was finally settled, I sat alone at our dining room table with the final paperwork spread out in front of me. I stared at the last page once, again, then a third time. I honestly thought there had to be a mistake. The estate was worth just over $51 million. Only 3 people knew the exact amount: our attorney, our financial advisor, and me. Not even my son, Noah. That wasn't because we didn't trust him. It was because Daniel wanted him to build a life defined by his own character, not by an inheritance waiting in the background. And Noah became exactly the man his father hoped he would be. Kind, honest, the type of person who'd spend an afternoon helping a neighbor fix a broken fence before buying himself something new. Maybe that's why what happened next hurt so much. Looking back, there was one moment I should have taken far more seriously. It happened the very first evening Noah brought his girlfriend to dinner. She barely asked about Daniel. She barely asked about our family. Instead, halfway through the meal, she looked at me and casually asked, "So, what happened to your husband's business after he passed away?" Without thinking, I answered politely. Looking back now, I wish I had smiled, changed the subject, and never answered her at all. Because that wasn't an innocent question. It was the first step in a plan I didn't even know existed. And before the wedding arrived, she had already started searching for a fortune she believed should become hers. The warning signs I tried to ignore. At first, I convinced myself I was imagining things. After all, Noah looked happier than he had in years. Who was I to question the woman he had fallen in love with? Still, there was something about Vanessa that kept unsettling me. She always smiled at exactly the right moment. She always said exactly the right words. Yet, somehow, nothing about her felt genuine. During that first dinner, she barely touched her food. Instead, she seemed far more interested in studying my home. Her eyes wandered from the old family photographs to the antique grandfather clock in the hallway. Then they lingered on Daniel's office door. So, she asked casually while swirling her glass of wine, did Daniel retire after selling the business? The question sounded harmless. But it wasn't really a question. It was fishing. He retired for a short while, I answered carefully. He wanted to enjoy life before he became ill. She nodded thoughtfully. And selling a company like that must have worked out well financially. I smiled politely. Daniel always believed happiness was worth more than money. She laughed. Not because the answer amused her. Because she realized I hadn't answered her question. That should have been enough to make me cautious. Instead, I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Over the following weeks, Noah changed in ways I couldn't explain. The son, who once compared prices before buying a new pair of shoes, suddenly arrived. Wearing designer clothes and a luxury watch I'd never seen before. When I teased him about it, he chuckled. Vanessa says I've spent my whole life being too practical. It didn't sound like Noah. It sounded like someone else's opinion coming out of his mouth. Then came another strange moment. One Sunday afternoon, Vanessa excused herself to use the restroom. She was gone for nearly 20 minutes. When she returned, her lipstick had been freshly touched up, but something else caught my attention. Daniel's office door was slightly open. I always kept it closed. Inside, nothing appeared out of place. Still, the tiny hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't explain why. That evening, I stood alone in Daniel's office, looking at the framed photograph on his desk. You always told me to trust my instincts, I whispered. For the first time since he'd passed away, I wished he could answer. A month later, Noah called with news that completely caught me off guard. Mom. His voice was overflowing with excitement. I proposed. I nearly dropped the phone. You've only been together a few months. When you know, he replied with a laugh. Maybe he believed that. I wasn't so sure. And deep inside, a feeling I couldn't shake kept telling me we were moving far too fast. 3 weeks later, Vanessa handed me a wedding budget across my own kitchen table. And the first number on that page made me realize this marriage wasn't just moving fast. It was becoming dangerously expensive. The moment my doubts became real, the wedding folder looked impressive. That didn't surprise me. Most engaged couples dream a little bigger than their budget allows. What surprised me was how complete everything already was. Vanessa placed the folder on my kitchen table with a confident smile. We just wanted your opinion. But as I flipped through the pages, it didn't feel like she wanted my opinion. It felt like she wanted my approval. Every vendor had already been chosen. Every major decision had already been made. There wasn't much left to discuss. Then I reached a page titled Post-Wedding Plans. Beneath it was a short list. Housing, finances, Long-term property goals. I frowned. What exactly is this? Before Noah could answer, Vanessa spoke. We've just been thinking ahead. She smiled warmly. This house is much bigger than one person needs. After we're married, maybe it makes more sense if we all live here together. Noah looked at me. It was only an idea, Mom. Maybe it was. But something about the way Vanessa watched my face made me feel as though she wasn't suggesting anything. She was measuring how difficult I might be to convince. That night, sleep never came. The following morning, I walked into Daniel's office. For weeks, I'd been telling myself my instincts were playing tricks on me. This time, I looked more carefully. Everything appeared normal. The desk was neat. The filing cabinet was still locked. Then my eyes stopped on a framed family photograph. I stared at it for several seconds. Something wasn't right. Netichemi. Daniel had always lined that frame up perfectly with the edge of his desk. Now, it was just slightly out of place. Most people never would have noticed. I reached behind it. Hidden inside the bookshelf was a small compartment only Daniel and I knew about. Inside were old letters, family keepsakes, and a sealed envelope marked simply, "Private." Nothing was missing. But the envelope had clearly been handled. It wasn't sitting where Daniel always kept it. Someone had opened the compartment, looked inside, and carefully put everything back. I closed it without touching another thing. For the first time, I stopped wondering if I was imagining everything. Someone had been searching for something. I simply didn't know what. Over the next several days, I became quieter. I listened more than I spoke, and patterns began to appear. Vanessa asked who managed Daniel's investments, whether I still met with our financial advisor, if I'd ever thought about selling the house. Each question sounded harmless on its own. Together, they painted a picture I could no longer ignore. Then, one afternoon, I stopped by Noah's apartment without calling first. As I walked toward the front door, I heard voices inside. Vanessa was talking. She had no idea I was standing only a few feet away. I reached for the doorbell. Then I heard her say, "Don't worry. Once everything's in place, she won't have much of a choice." The room fell silent. My hand froze in midair. I couldn't prove she was talking about me, but every instinct I had told me she was. I quietly turned around, got back into my car, and drove home in complete silence. The entire drive, one of Daniel's old sayings, kept echoing in my mind. The most dangerous people aren't the ones who ask for money. They're the ones who convince you it was your own idea to give it away. For the first time, I stopped worrying about what Vanessa wanted. Instead, I found myself wondering whether my son had already fallen into a trap he couldn't even see. And just a few days later, Vanessa made a request, so bold. It confirmed my worst fear. She hadn't married into our family by accident. She had arrived with a plan. The phone call that changed everything. For the next 2 days, I couldn't shake what I'd overheard outside Noah's apartment. I tried talking myself out of it. Maybe I'd misunderstood. Maybe Vanessa had been talking about work, or someone else entirely. I wanted that to be true. But no matter how hard I tried, one thought kept coming back. My instincts had never lied to me before. 3 evenings later, Noah called. "Hey, Mom," he said. Vanessa and I were thinking about stopping by tonight. We've got an idea we wanted to run past you. His voice sounded relaxed. The same Noah I'd known his whole life. For a second, I wondered if I'd let my imagination get the best of me. Sure, I told him. Come on over. They arrived carrying my favorite Italian takeout. For the next hour, everything felt surprisingly normal. Noah joked about burning dinner the week before. We laughed over old family stories. For a little while, it felt like we'd found our way back to being a family. Then Vanessa reached into her designer handbag. The warmth from dinner disappeared the moment I saw the folder. She placed it carefully on the table. I've been working on something, she said. I stayed quiet. She opened the folder herself. Inside were renovation sketches, contractor estimates, and floor plans. For my house. She smiled, as though she were sharing exciting news. If we're all living here after the wedding, I figured we could make the place work better for everybody. Her finger traced, one drawing after another. We could knock out this wall, open up the kitchen, and this room, ... she said, pointing toward the back of the house. It would make a perfect nursery one day. That room wasn't just another room. It was Daniel's office. The place where he balanced the books, planned the business, and spent countless evenings dreaming about the future we'd build together. I looked at Noah. He finally spoke. Nobody's trying to pressure you. He sounded sincere. But Vanessa thought it'd be easier if we planned ahead. For the first time, I heard uncertainty in his voice. He wasn't leading the conversation. He was trying to keep the peace. I closed the folder and gently pushed it back across the table. I appreciate the effort, I said. But this house isn't being remodeled. Vanessa didn't argue. She simply nodded. Fair enough, she replied. There wasn't an ounce of disappointment in her voice. If anything, she sounded patient, as though she believed she'd eventually get the answer she wanted. That calm confidence unsettled me more than an argument ever could. Waintulis Ragdanoa. He held on a little longer than usual, almost as if something was weighing on him. Then Vanessa stopped at the front door. Oh, before I forget, ... She turned toward me with that same pleasant smile. Have you updated your estate plan since Daniel passed? The room went completely silent. Nobody had mentioned wills. Nobody had mentioned inheritance. Yet, somehow, she had. I met her eyes. Why would you ask that? She gave a small shrug. I've just seen families run into problems when those things aren't organized. Then she smiled again. Just thought I'd ask. After they drove away, I stood at the living room window for a long time. Daniel used to tell me, people can fool you with words. They almost never fool you with patterns. Vanessa's pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. That night, I called our family attorney. He'd handled every legal matter Daniel ever trusted to anyone. After a few minutes of small talk, I asked the question that had been bothering me. Has anyone contacted your office asking about Daniel's estate? The line went quiet. Finally, he sighed. Margaret, yes. My heart skipped. But that's not the part that worries me. I gripped the phone tighter. What do you mean? They never asked how much the estate was worth. I frowned. Then what were they asking? Another long pause. Everything inside me went cold. Because that wasn't the question of someone who was merely curious. It was the question of someone already making plans. Before we ended the call, my attorney said one more thing. It was who had been asking those questions. The truth my attorney had been keeping. I didn't say a word. I just sat there with the phone pressed against my ear. My attorney had practiced law for more than 30 years. He wasn't the kind of man who got rattled. But the hesitation in his voice told me this wasn't an ordinary phone call. Who was it? I finally asked. Another pause. I have to be careful because of attorney-client confidentiality, he said. But you're the trustee of Daniel's estate, so I can tell you what directly concerns you. I took a slow breath. The person who contacted my office claimed they were trying to understand your family's long-term financial planning. That answer didn't sit right with me. Whoever it was, he continued, kept asking the same question. I closed my eyes. What question? When does Noah receive full control of his inheritance? Not how much money there was. Not what assets Daniel had left behind. Just one thing. When? That wasn't simple curiosity. It was timing. I thanked him for his honesty, but before I could end the call, he stopped me. Margaret, there's one more thing. I tightened my grip on the phone. The caller already knew details that aren't public. What kind of details? They knew Daniel had established a trust. They knew Noah wouldn't receive everything immediately. And they knew there were legal conditions attached. A chill ran through me. Very few people knew those details. Daniel, our attorney, our financial advisor, and me. So how could anyone else know? I wish I had an answer, he admitted. After we hung up, I sat alone in the quiet house. My eyes drifted toward Daniel's office. Natichimi. The hidden compartment. The envelope. Whoever had searched that room hadn't been looking for cash. They'd been looking for information. Suddenly, every strange moment made sense. The questions. The office. The conversation outside Noah's apartment. Even the renovation plans. None of it had been random. It was all leading somewhere. The next morning, I invited Noah to breakfast. Just the two of us. He looked surprised when I asked him whether Vanessa had ever brought up Daniel's estate. Yeah, he admitted. A few times. What did she ask? Shrugged. Whether Dad had a trust when I'd eventually take over. Stuff like that. And what did you tell her? The truth. I told her I didn't know. He looked almost embarrassed. I figured you handled all of that. Relief washed over me. Noah wasn't hiding anything. He wasn't part of the plan. If anything, he seemed just as unaware as I had been. Which meant Vanessa wasn't trying to convince both of us. She was trying to convince him. That evening, just after sunset, my doorbell rang. When I opened it, Vanessa was standing there alone. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said with an easy smile as she stepped inside before I could answer. She looked around the living room like she'd already been there 100 times. Then she turned to me. "I've been thinking." She paused, just long enough to hold my attention. "I know Daniel set things up so Noah couldn't access everything right away." Every muscle in my body tightened. I had never told her that. Neither had Noah. She smiled as though she'd just confirmed something she already believed. But maybe it's time we talked about changing those arrangements. There was only one question running through my mind. How did she know about the trust? And who had been feeding her information? The secret she was never supposed to know. For several long seconds, neither of us spoke. I simply looked at Vanessa. She stood in my living room as though nothing about the conversation had made her uncomfortable. Calm, collected, completely at ease. The confidence in her face bothered me far more than anger ever could. I finally broke the silence. How do you know Daniel created a trust? She tilted her head ever so slightly. I've read a lot about estate planning, she replied. People who've built businesses usually protect their families that way. It was a polished answer, one that sounded as though she'd rehearsed it long before ringing my doorbell. I folded my hands in my lap. That's interesting, because Noah doesn't know about the trust. I never told anyone outside our attorney and financial advisor. For the first time that evening, something flickered across her face. Not fear. More like surprise that I'd said it out loud. The moment passed, almost instantly. Then she gave a quiet smile. I guess I made a lucky guess. Maybe. But life had taught me that people rarely guessed correctly when they didn't already have a reason to. I decided to keep going. So why does any of this matter to you? She reached for her handbag but didn't pick it up. Instead, she rested one hand on it while holding my gaze. This has never been about money. It has always been about Noah. If there are legal decisions that keep him from building the future he deserves. She paused for just a moment. Then maybe those decisions should be reconsidered. There it was. Ta demand. Not an argument. Just an idea carefully wrapped to sound reasonable. I leaned back in my chair. Daniel didn't make those decisions overnight. He spent years making sure Noah would be protected, even after he was gone. Vanessa nodded politely, and I'm sure he believed he was doing the right thing. But people make plans for the future without knowing how life will change. Again, she wasn't asking. She was planting an idea. The kind of idea that slowly grows if nobody challenges it. I watched her for another moment before asking the question that mattered most. Did someone tell you about the trust? She looked directly at me. No. She didn't sound nervous. She sounded careful. There was a difference. Without another word, she picked up her handbag and walked toward the front door. Her hand rested on the doorknob before she glanced back over her shoulder. Oh, one more thing. I've already booked a meeting with a financial planner after the honeymoon. I frowned. What for? So Noah and I can start organizing our future. Then, almost as an afterthought, she added, it'll make everything easier once the timing works in our favor. She smiled, wished me a good evening, and quietly let herself out. I locked the front door and stood there for a long moment. Daniel had always believed that the character revealed itself through patterns, not promises. Over the past few months, Vanessa had left a trail of patterns that was becoming impossible to ignore. Questions about the business. Questions about the trust. Questions about the house. Individually, they meant very little. Together, they painted a picture I couldn't dismiss anymore. The next morning, I made a decision I never thought I'd have to make. I hired a licensed private investigator. Not because I wanted someone digging through Vanessa's life. I wanted one simple question answered. Was she really the person she claimed to be? 48 hours later, the investigator called me. He hadn't uncovered anything dramatic. No hidden crimes. No secret fortune. Just one detail that immediately caught my attention. For months before she ever met Noah, Vanessa had been meeting regularly with the same family law attorney. The attorney wasn't helping her plan a wedding. He specialized in inheritance disputes and estate settlements. And suddenly, the timing of everything no longer felt like a coincidence. The piece that finally fit. For a long moment, I sat there staring at my phone. A family law attorney. 5 meetings. Before Vanessa had ever met Noah. The number itself wasn't illegal. But, according to the investigator, it was unusual. Most people don't meet with the same attorney that many times before getting married, he told me. 5 appointments usually mean someone is planning for something important. I thanked him and hung up. I still wasn't interested in assuming the worst. There could be an explanation. A family issue. A legal dispute. Something completely unrelated to my son. That's what I kept telling myself. The following afternoon, the investigator called again. I wasn't looking for this, he said. I actually stumbled across it while checking public records. What did you find? Vanessa was engaged about 2 years ago. I stayed quiet. The relationship ended before the wedding. Nothing suspicious. No lawsuits. No police reports. Just ... An engagement that quietly fell apart. So why does it matter? It might not, he admitted. But her former fiancé owned a successful construction company. Again, that fact didn't prove anything. People fall in love. People break up. Successful people get divorced every day. On its own, it meant very little. But every new fact seemed to point in the same direction. Vanessa had a habit of planning far ahead, and she seemed unusually interested in financial security long before marriage entered the picture. Late that evening, Noah stopped by after work. He looked exhausted. Dark circles had settled under his eyes. Wedding planning wearing you out? I asked with a smile. He laughed softly. You have no idea. I made us both coffee, and we carried our mugs onto the back porch. For a while, we talked about ordinary things. The weather. His jobby. Baseball. It reminded me of the conversations we used to have before life became so complicated. Then Noah looked at me. Mom, can I ask you something? Always hesitated. Do you think Vanessa feels welcome here? The question caught me off guard. I've been trying, I answered honestly. He nodded. I know. Then he rubbed the back of his neck. It's just ... She keeps saying once we're married, we'll finally be able to start making long-term decisions. I looked at him. What kind of decisions? He shrugged. I don't know. She talks about simplifying things. She says families work better when everything is organized. He smiled awkwardly. Honestly, I think she's just excited about building a future together. I returned his smile. But inside, another piece quietly fell into place. Those weren't random conversations. She was preparing him. Not by arguing. Not by demanding. By making certain ideas feel completely normal. As Noah got ready to leave, he gave me a hug. "I hope you and Vanessa get closer," he said. "So do I replied. And I meant it. Because if I was wrong about her, nothing would make me happier. But if I was right, my son was walking into a situation he couldn't even see. The next afternoon, the investigator called one last time. "I spoke with someone familiar with those meetings," he said. "They couldn't discuss confidential advice, and they never mentioned your family." Paused. "But they did remember the general topic Vanessa kept asking about." I held my breath. She wanted to understand, in general terms, how family trusts work after someone gets married. Another pause. And one question came up more than once. What was it? How difficult is it to legally change or challenge a trust once new family members become part of the picture? The investigator sighed. Those were general legal questions. They weren't about your family's documents. But after everything you've told me, Dad, I figured you deserved to know. I slowly lowered the phone. For the first time, I wasn't afraid because of what I knew. I was afraid because I finally understood how patient Vanessa had been. That night, I opened the sealed envelope Daniel had hidden years earlier. Inside was a handwritten letter addressed to me. The first sentence made my heart stop. "Margaret, if you're reading this sooner than we expected, someone is asking the wrong questions." The letter Daniel left behind. For nearly 5 minutes, I just stared at the envelope. I recognized Daniel's handwriting the instant I saw it. Even after all this time, it felt like a part of him had walked back into the room. Written across the front were just a few words. "For Margaret. Only if something doesn't feel right." My hands weren't as steady as I wanted them to be. I carefully unfolded the letter. The first sentence made my heart stop. "Margaret, if you're reading this sooner than we expected, someone is asking the wrong questions." I closed my eyes. For just a second, I could almost hear Daniel's voice the way he'd pause before saying something important, making sure every word mattered. Swallowing hard, I kept reading. If Noah is happy and building a good life, this letter will probably stay hidden forever. But if someone becomes interested in what we own before they become interested in who we are, trust your instincts. I lowered the letter into my lap. Daniel wasn't warning me about one specific person. He was reminding me of something we'd learned together over 40 years. Character always reveals itself. Sometimes quietly, sometimes slowly, but always eventually. The next paragraph made me think even harder. Money has a way of changing conversations. Listen carefully to the questions people ask. They'll tell you what matters long before they'll admit it. Looking back, nearly every important conversation with Vanessa had drifted toward the same subject. Business, the house, the trust, the future. No matter where a conversation started, it always found its way back to money. Not once had she asked me what kind of husband Daniel had been. Not once had she wanted to hear the stories behind the business. She cared about the destination, never the journey. I carefully folded the letter. Something told me Daniel hadn't hidden it simply to warn me. He'd hidden it to prepare me. Behind the first page was another sheet. Only 3 short lines. "If you ever question someone's intentions, Art. Don't rush to expose them. Give them enough time to reveal themselves. I couldn't help smiling through the tears. That was Daniel. Patient, practical, never louder than he needed to be. The next evening, Noah stopped by after work. He looked tired. More than tired. He looked conflicted. We carried 2 glasses of iced tea onto the back porch, just like we had dozens of times over the years. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Oh, I need your opinion. Anything." He stared down at his glass. "Vanessa thinks we should combine all our finances right after the honeymoon." He gave an awkward little laugh. "She says married couples shouldn't keep separate accounts." I chose my words carefully. Every marriage is different. But financial decisions don't have to be made on anyone else's schedule. He nada. I told her I'd rather take things one step at a time. What did she say? His smile disappeared. She said people who trust each other shouldn't need time. That answer stayed with me long after Noah drove home. It wasn't about a joint bank account. It was about creating pressure. The kind that makes hesitation sound like betrayal. Later that evening, I called our attorney. "I've decided not to change a single part of Daniel's estate plan," I told him. "I figured that's what you'd decide," he replied. Then his voice grew quieter. "Margaret, there's one more thing." My grip tightened around the phone. This afternoon, someone contacted my office again. I took a slow breath. What did they want? They weren't asking about the trust itself. They wanted to know whether you'd made any recent changes. The room suddenly felt very still. Before we ended the call, he said something I haven't forgotten since. "Whatever they're waiting for ... They don't want to wait much longer." I hung up and looked toward Daniel's office. For the first time, I realized I wasn't simply protecting an inheritance anymore. I was protecting my husband's final promise to our son. 2 days later, our entire family gathered for the wedding rehearsal. Halfway through dinner, Vanessa stood up, raised her glass, and made an announcement no one had discussed beforehand. She smiled and said, "After the honeymoon, Noah and I will be moving into Mom's house so we can start our future together." Every head at the table slowly turned toward me, because that was the first I'd heard of it. The announcement I never agreed to. The room fell completely silent. For a second, I honestly thought I'd heard Vanessa wrong. She stood at the head of the table with a champagne glass in her hand, smiling at everyone gathered around us. "After the honeymoon," she said again, "Noah and I are moving into Mom's house so we can start our life together." A few relatives clapped. Someone even said, "That's wonderful." Every face in the room slowly turned toward me. They were waiting for me to confirm what Vanessa had just announced. I looked at Noah. The color had drained from his face. His smile was gone. He looked just as surprised as I was. That was all I needed to know. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Vanessa hadn't forgotten to tell us. She counted on making the announcement in front of everyone. Daniel used to say that some people ask for permission in private. Others announce decisions in public and hope embarrassment will do the rest. I refused to let that happen. I smiled politely. "Well," I said, "that's certainly exciting." Vanessa relaxed, just a little. Then I finished my sentence. "It's also the first time I've heard anything about it." The silence returned. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats. One uncle quietly cleared his throat. Vanessa laughed, but it sounded forced. "Oh, I guess Noah and I got ahead of ourselves." She glanced toward him. "We've talked about it so much. I assumed everyone already knew." Noah looked at her, confused. We talked about maybe bringing it up someday." Dapt. "But we never decided anything." For the first time all evening, Vanessa didn't have an answer ready. She simply smiled and reached for her drink. The conversation moved on, but the mood never fully recovered. By the end of dinner, people were saying polite goodbyes instead of lingering like they usually did. Outside, Noah caught up with me before I reached my car. He looked miserable. "I'm so sorry." "You don't owe me an apology." I honestly had no idea she was going to say that. "I know." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She's been bringing up your house a lot lately." I figured she was just thinking about the future. I waited. There was something else. He looked down at the pavement. "She keeps telling me married couples shouldn't put off big decisions. She says the sooner we combine our lives, the stronger our marriage will be." His words sounded less like agreement, and more like someone repeating an argument they'd heard over and over. For the first time, I realized Noah wasn't defending Vanessa anymore. He was trying to understand her. The next morning, I invited him to breakfast. Just the two of us. When the waitress brought our coffee, I placed Daniel's letter on the table between us. Noah recognized his father's handwriting immediately. Without saying a word, he unfolded the pages and began reading. I watched his expression change with every paragraph. Sadness, reflection, then quiet understanding. When he reached the final line, he carefully folded the letter again. "I miss him," he whispered. "So He looked out the diner window for a long moment before speaking again. A few weeks ago, Vanessa asked if I'd ever consider putting both our names on any property after we got married. I stayed silent. I told her I wasn't comfortable making decisions like that right away." He shook his head. "She said marriage only works when there's complete trust." Suddenly, every uncomfortable conversation we'd had over the past few months lined up in my mind like pieces of the same puzzle. The questions about Daniel's business, the trust, the house, the pressure to move quickly. None of it had happened by accident. I reached across the table and put my hand over Noah's. "Your father always told us that trust isn't proven by how fast someone wants an answer. It's proven by how they respond when the answer is not yet." Noah lowered his eyes. For the first time, I could see doubt about replacing certainty. Not because I'd convinced him, because he'd reach that conclusion himself. As we stood outside the diner, he took a deep breath. "I'm going to talk to Vanessa. Alone. I need to hear the truth from her. Nadad. I think that's the right thing to do." He gave me a quick hug, climbed into his truck, and drove away. I watched until his taillights disappeared around the corner. For the first time in weeks, I wasn't afraid of what I knew. I was afraid of what Noah was about to learn. The wedding was less than 24 hours away. That afternoon, Noah met Vanessa alone and asked her the questions she'd been avoiding for months. When he called me an hour later, the very first words out of his mouth were, "We need to cancel the wedding." the conversation that ended everything. My phone rang a little after 3 that afternoon. The moment I saw Noah's name, I answered. No. His voice barely sounded like his own. Not angry. Not emotional. Just drained. We need to cancel the wedding. I closed my eyes. Not because I was relieved. Because I knew those 6 words had probably been the hardest he'd ever spoken. What happened? I asked softly. He took a slow breath. I met Vanessa. I asked her if we could talk without anyone else around. And at first, everything was normal. She thought we were going over wedding plans. Then his voice grew quieter. I asked her why she'd been so interested in Dad's trust. What did she say? She smiled and told me I was listening to too many people. Paused. So I asked again, why does everything keep coming back to my dad's money? Another pause. She said, Noah, this has never been about money. It's about building the best future we can. It sounded like the same answer she'd given me. Carefully chosen. Carefully rehearsed. But I couldn't let it go, Noah continued. So I asked her something she'd never expected. He took another slow breath. I asked, would you still want to marry me if my dad had never owned the business? For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Finally, Vanessa frowned. Why would you even ask me something like that? I looked at her, Noah said, and I asked again, would you? This time, she didn't answer. She looked away. Then she quietly said, that's not a fair question. I waited. I wanted her to tell me yes. I wanted her to laugh and call me crazy. Instead, she crossed her arms. You're really going to throw away everything we've planned over one hypothetical question? Noah's voice cracked. She still never answered. That silence told him everything words never could. I stood up. I told her I couldn't marry someone who couldn't answer the simplest question I'd ever asked. What did she do? I whispered. She got angry. She said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Then he laughed quietly. It wasn't the laugh of someone amused. It was the laugh of someone finally accepting a painful truth. Do you know what hurt the most, Mom? What? She never asked me to stay. She never asked if I was okay. The only thing she asked was whether. I'd already told everyone the wedding was off. I didn't know what to say. Some heartbreak doesn't leave room for advice. Only silence. About an hour later, Noah pulled into my driveway. When I opened the front door, he looked exhausted. Not from the argument. From watching the future he'd imagined disappear in a single afternoon. I wrapped my arms around him. For the first time since Daniel passed away, my son let himself cry. When he finally stepped back, he looked around the house. Dad would have figured it out a lot sooner. I smiled sadly. Maybe. But your father also believed people deserved the chance to show you who they really are. Noah nodded slowly. I guess she finally did. He looked at me for a long moment. Do you think I'll ever forgive myself? I shook my head. There's nothing to forgive. You trusted someone you loved. That's never something to be ashamed of. He managed the smallest smile. And for the first time in months, I felt like I had my son back. The wedding was officially cancelled before sunset. Family members were disappointed. Friends were shocked. But deep down I knew Daniel would have made the very same choice. Not because he distrusted people, because he'd always believed that character matters more than promises. I thought cancelling the wedding would finally bring our family some peace. I was wrong. The very next morning, there was a knock at my front door. Vanessa had come back one last time, not to apologize, but to ask for something that left every person in that room speechless. What we really kept. The knock came just after 9 the next morning. I already knew who it was. When I opened the front door, Vanessa was standing there. This time, there was no confident smile, no polished speech waiting on her lips. She looked tired. Behind her stood her older sister, someone I'd only met a couple of times. "I just need 5 minutes," Vanessa said quietly. I glanced back at Noah. He was standing in the hallway behind me. For the first time in months, he didn't look confused. He looked certain. He gave a small nod. 5 minutes. We sat in the living room, the same room where Daniel and I had celebrated birthdays. Christmas mornings and 40 years of ordinary moments that had become extraordinary simply because we shared them together. No one spoke at first. Finally, Vanessa broke the silence. "I know you're both upset. I understand why." She looked directly at Noah. "I made mistakes. But I don't think one bad conversation should erase everything we've built." Noah listened without interrupting. Then he asked the same question that had ended the wedding. "I'll ask you one last time. If my dad had never owned the business, ... if there had never been a trust, ... if my family had lived in a tiny apartment instead of this house, would you still have chosen me?" The room became perfectly still. Vanessa opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her sister quietly touched her arm. "Vanessa." But no answer came. Not because she couldn't speak, because she knew any answer now would sound like the answer Noah wanted to hear. After several long seconds, Noah slowly stood. "I think that's my answer." There was no anger in his voice, only disappointment, the kind that doesn't disappear overnight. Vanessa's eyes filled with tears. "I did love you. I still do." Noah nodded. "I believe part of you probably did. But love can't survive once trust is gone." For the first time since she'd entered our lives, Vanessa had nothing left to say. She quietly picked up her handbag. As she reached the door, she looked back at me. "I'm sorry." I believed she meant it. Whether she was apologizing for her choices, or simply for how everything had fallen apart, only she knew. She walked out. Her sister followed. The front door closed gently behind them. Noah remained standing for a moment. Then he slowly sat down on the couch without saying a word. I sat beside him. Neither of us spoke. The morning sunlight stretched across the living room floor, and somewhere outside I could hear birds singing like it was any other day. Sometimes silence is what healing sounds like. After a while, Noah looked over at me and quietly smiled. Not because he wasn't hurting, but because he finally knew he had made the right choice. Most people were surprised. Some were heartbroken for Noah. But every person who truly cared about him said the same thing. It's better to cancel one day than regret the next 30 years. Life slowly found its rhythm again. One Saturday afternoon, Noah came over to help me clean Daniel's office. He carefully unfolded the letter one last time. Neither of us needed to read it again. We already knew every word by heart. When he finished, he folded it neatly, slid it back into the envelope, and walked over to the old picture frame that had hidden the compartment. He gently placed the letter back inside. Then he smiled. I think Dad wanted this here. Not for us anymore. For whoever might need his advice someday. Dad. That sounds exactly like your father. Before Noah left, he picked up an old photograph of the three of us standing outside our very first hardware store. Daniel was covered in sawdust. I was laughing. Noah couldn't have been older than 8. Dad looked happy, Noah said. He was, I replied. Not because of the business. Because he was exactly where he wanted to be. Noah hugged me before walking toward the front door. Thanks for believing in me, ... Even when I couldn't believe in myself. After he left, I stood alone in Daniel's office for a long time. Then I looked toward the hidden compartment one last time. For years, I thought Daniel's greatest achievement was the business we built together. I couldn't have been more wrong. His greatest legacy was raising a son who was willing to walk away from everything. Rather than spend his life with someone he couldn't fully trust. As I turned off the office light, I smiled. Some legacies aren't measured by what we leave behind. They're measured by the values that stay with the people we love. The end